What's going on, guys? My name is Michael James. I'm a published author and full-time writer, and today we are going through my notebook once again. This is just where we're going to talk about all the notes I wrote during the month of February. So grab yourself a cozy sweater, because real writers wear grandpa sweaters, and they keep you cozy and keep you comfy while you're writing. And make sure you have yourself a coffee, and let's get right into it. Alright, so like I said, we're going over the notes I took during the month of February on The Writer's Journey. Listen, if you have not bought this book already, I've talked about it in almost every single video I shoot. It's an incredible book, phenomenal book. I'm almost done with it, and it's just so good. I highly recommend it. And I'll leave a link in the description if you want to support me. It is an affiliate link. Doesn't cost you anything extra. I get paid like 4% of whatever you buy on Amazon if you use my link. Journaling has been so beneficial and has really changed my life as a writer. It's just been really helpful to get the creative juices flowing and writing more often, and it's calming in the morning. It's a way of almost like meditation, and I really enjoy it. And I'm so happy I've been taking notes because, you know, I'll look back on these and I'll be proud of them. I'll be like, oh, I remember learning about this, or like, oh, I wonder what I wrote about this point in storytelling or whatever. So really happy I started this. We have like 14 pages to get over, so we're going to go quickly. But I would highly recommend you watch the previous video on my notes if you want to follow along with the notes, because these notes are going to build off of those as I'm reading through the book. Also, I would highly recommend, if you want to take notes along with me, I think you should, because there's some really good notes in here. Or even if you don't want to take notes, but just listen closely, because some of these things might stick out to you and you're like, like never really thought about that, and you might learn something about storytelling today. So let's get into it. All right, so we are talking about the call to adventure. The call to adventure, the inciting incident, catalyst, or trigger. An event is necessary to get the story moving. So you gotta have an event in the beginning or your story doesn't happen. And actually, a great example I heard of this is somebody was talking about, think of telling someone a story in real life. Like if you were like, dude, you'll never guess what happened at the gas station today. If nothing happened, then there's no reason to tell them about the gas station and what you did there, right? If there was something out of the ordinary, some event took place, or something crazy happened. And it's the same with storytelling. If you don't have a crazy event taking place or something out of the ordinary taking place, there's no reason for you to tell a story, right? And I'm not saying out of the ordinary needs to be something super off the walls, but what I am saying is that it needs to be something that catches your reader's attention. It needs to be something that hooks the reader. It either needs to be relatable or entertaining or exciting, thrilling, whatever it is. So make sure that you have an event to get your story kicking off. Sometimes a call is delivered by the herald. It is an invitation or challenge for the hero to face the unknown. Herald as in the herald mask, which I talked about in the previous video. The call to adventure is a process of selection. Instability arises, and one must volunteer or be chosen to take responsibility. Reluctant heroes must be called repeatedly. Motivated heroes need no external urging due to an inner calling. Let this cup pass from me, which is actually scriptural. It's from when Jesus is praying in the garden to his Father, and he says, is there another way? Heroes often look for another way or attempt to dodge the adventure. There needs to be a new motivation or a reminder to the hero in order to continue. Which I wouldn't say that Christ is the best example, because I don't think he was trying to dodge his adventure. But that being said, it is a good foreshadowing of storytelling in general, how people try to find an alternative route. And it's actually interesting, because if you think of the story of Jesus, and you think of this moment where he says, let this cup pass from me, this is right before the climax. This is not at the beginning of a story where we're talking about the call to adventure. All this to say, I wanted to bring up the point that your story points don't always have to be in a set order. Like the call to adventure, you can have one in the beginning, but at the same time, you can have other calls to adventure throughout the story. Like in the story of Christ, his call to adventure right before the climax, where he was like, let this cup pass from me, and basically was told there's no other way, and then he goes and does it. He goes and dies on the cross. So that's an example of how the call to adventure, it doesn't have to take place in the very beginning only. Sometimes heroes use excuses to refuse the call. These excuses often result in consequences. Sometimes heroes' refusal is a wise decision. Three Little Pigs refused to let the wolf inside, which I never really thought about. I never really thought about the hero refusing to the point of actually seeing that it was a good decision. And I actually kind of want to make a story about that now. Like having a character refuse doing something bad, and that's how the story starts. It would be really interesting to have a story start with the refusal to the call. I've never really thought about that myself. When the hero does not refuse the call, there are still often indicators to the audience of the dangerous ahead shown through others' experience or backstory. So a lot of times the refusal to the call is because the hero says it's dangerous, or they're scared, or I'm not equipped for this, or whatever it is. And that's where a mentor comes in and says, I'll provide all these things for you. Like, I will teach you, I will give you these gifts, I will do this. Sometimes in some stories where a hero does not refuse the call, someone else will try to stop them. And that's what will show how dangerous the story is. Like, you see the danger when someone is fearful of accepting the call, but on the opposite, in contrast, you see the danger in this call when others are saying, don't go. Like, the 5 guys that went before you never returned, or whatever. So there's usually some kind of indication that this is a dangerous call to action that your character is taking. Some mentors push the hero to take the call, while others act as a threshold guardian with warnings about what lies ahead if they take the call. Sometimes there is a limitation on the call. You can eat of any tree of the garden except this one. This type of call foreshadows that the hero will most likely cross that line. I love this type of call. You see this in a lot of stories where, think of like Finding Nemo. His call to adventure was to touch the boat. But then he was told not to do it. But because he's being told not to do it, he was like, I have to prove that I can do it. And then that's when the event takes place and he gets in trouble. Mentors provide services: protecting, guiding, teaching, testing, training, and gifts. When the hero first meets the mentor, it is usually a time of providing the hero with the supplies, knowledge, and confidence necessary in order to begin the adventure. Heroes almost always are given wisdom in some ways before embarking on a journey. Example, Hagrid and Harry Potter. Great example. He gives Harry so much. Gives him a birthday cake, gives him a bird, sends him to the wand shop. Like he gives him everything. He gives him access to his bank, I think, or whatever. Hagrid's the dude. I like his beard. An important role of a mentor is to get the story rolling. Mutus, I think I might be butchering that. Mutus, mentor, mental, come from the Greek word menos, meaning intention, force, purpose, as well as mind, spirit, remembrance, and courage. Some mentors trick heroes. Fagin tricks boys like Oliver Twist into pickpocketing. I love that scene, by the way. If you've never read Oliver Twist, great book. And Fagin's awesome. Fagin is a really funny character, and the way Charles Dickens describes him with a little bit of irony and satire, I love it. It's just so cool because he looks like a good guy, but he's teaching these kids to do bad things. It's cool. Use the audience's expectations and assumptions to surprise them. This is a great quote. You should use the audience's expectations against them. Now, that's not always the case because, for example, if your audience expects your hero to win in the end, and then right before the ending you have him die off, and you just leave it at that, that is very unsatisfying to your reader, and they will not be happy with you catching them off guard. Now, but with other things like, for example, you can eat of any tree of the garden except this one. Maybe have someone else make the mistake other than the main character. So then your reader's like, oh, didn't see that one coming. So that's just an example, but sometimes heroes of one story become the mentor in the next story. Obi-Wan Kenobi, he starts as an apprentice in episode 1. Episode 2 and 3, he starts being the master to Anakin. Somewhat fails at that, or Anakin fails him, and then he's a mentor to Luke. Mentors are usually crucial to help build courage. Some mentors only appear a few times when the hero is in need. The mask of the mentor shows that all, even heroes, must learn the lessons of life from someone or something. Whether it's one person, many people at different phases, a tradition, etc. the mentor mask gets the story unstuck with gifts, encouragement, guidance, or advice. This is also a really good tip that I wrote down. And I love this point, how when you get to a point in your story where you're like, man, I'm stuck and I cannot figure out how to get out of here, or like I put my main character in a pickle and I can't get him out. Think of how you can incorporate the mentor, or what the mentor's taught, or the mentor's gifts, because those are things that get characters unstuck in stories all the time. So I love this advice, because I even noticed in a story, I'm working on a novel right now, in my own novel, I incorporated this without even realizing I was incorporating it. There was a part where my character was all down in the dumps, and then the mentor's voice is in his head and says, don't forget, you can do this, and then he goes on to actually do it. So it's very interesting that sometimes these things are almost like subconscious, but like understanding them and realizing them will help you do them more purposely, and it will just make your story stronger. Writers are in a way a mentor to the reader, teaching valuable life lessons through entertainment, wisdom, encouragement. I hope that I'm a mentor to you. Examples of a story without a mentor: Indiana Jones. That's so cool. I never really thought about that either, like having a story without a mentor. I can't think of why you would ever do that. Like, have a story without a... Well, I mean, unless you want to write Indiana Jones, I guess. But it's really interesting to think of it that way. The most critical action of Act 1 is crossing the first threshold into Act 2. So now we're moving on from the call to adventure. Now we're moving on to crossing the first threshold. Crossing the first threshold is an act of the will in which the hero commits wholeheartedly to the adventure. In most cases, the hero does not just decide to begin the adventure. An external force comes into play, forcing them to commit. For example, villains capture a loved one, a deadline forces their hand, bad weather pushes them into adventure, or even being tricked into the adventure are all examples of the external forces that are commonly used in stories. For example, if you think of the story Shrek has all these fairy tale creatures show up at a swamp, which forces him into adventure. And then he gets forced into adventure a second time when he goes to talk to Lord Farquaad. And Lord Farquaad says, okay, I'll give you what you want if you go on this quest. So he's forced on adventure again. Stakes usually rise once the hero is pushed into Act 2. Sometimes it is an eternal thought that can push the hero. What if I do nothing? Will I regret not going for the rest of my life? Will you? Will you regret it? The moment a hero decides to cross the threshold, they are often met with their first obstacle, a threshold guardian. Threshold guardians are not always enemies per se. Sometimes instead of being an obstacle to defeat, they are more like a gatekeeper to tip. They can even turn into allies or give help or advice at times. Think of like a bouncer at a club. Like maybe the kid's 17 trying to get into a club and he's like, you need ID, and he tips the bouncer so that he can get in, or like he finds a way to sneak around the bouncer, or has a fake ID to disguise himself and get around the bouncer. That's an example of a threshold guardian. But sometimes even allies or mentors can act as threshold guardians because the hero is doing something that they disagree with, or they're trying to warn them of the dangers of that decision. And the hero has to convince them that to get out of his way, to let him go or whatever. And that's an example of a threshold guardian as well. So actually, in some parts of The Lord of the Rings, I feel like Sam is kind of like a threshold guardian, because Frodo has to work his way through him when Sam is like, you can't trust this creature. A metaphor in use at Disney. A story is like a flight. Loading, fueling, and going down the runway is Act 1. The moment the wheels leave the ground is the first threshold. Good metaphor, Disney. First impression of the special world should sharply contrast with the ordinary world. This is important to make sure that once your story enters that moment where the event kicks off and the adventure begins, you have to make sure that there's a contrast to how the ordinary world felt. I mean, if you think about Shrek and how much he hates Donkey, one of the big contrasting moments in the adventure is when he allows Donkey to act as his guide and take him to Lord Farquaad. So that is a huge, sharp contrast that shows that the adventure begins for Shrek. In some stories, the hero remains physically in the same place, but a new emotional territory is explored. So like a romance, Special World has different feel, different rhythm, different priorities and values, different rules. Think of like, when the story begins, your main character isn't doing the things that they would be doing during the adventure. So obviously, the adventure has a different feel to it that cause them to act differently. My next note goes along with that. Things are often more dangerous and the price of mistakes is higher. Usually the stakes become greater and greater as the story progresses, especially when you enter this new world. Like, things are totally different. There's a period of adjustment to the special known as testing. During this period, heroes face trials, traps, challenges, and other obstacles, which further prepare them for greater ordeals ahead. These obstacles should build up to the later events in the story that carry a greater weight, life and death scenarios. This is also a time of building allies or making enemies, a test of the hero's judgment of character. I love this little addition here they had in the book of, this is a test of your hero's judgment of character, because sometimes heroes make a decision that, making friends or following the wrong crowd, and that bites them in the butt later. And this is, during this time, this is the test of their judgment of character, and you see if it's a good judgment of character or not. Some stories introduce the rival during testing, a character who may not necessarily be an enemy, but is seen more as a competitor, often for a love interest. This makes me think of Han Solo, because he kind of competes with Luke a little bit. He has that competitive attitude, his ego. Special worlds have new rules, which the hero and audience must learn and adjust to. Often, testing takes place at a bar or saloon. Just like a hunter looks for game or information at a watering hole, heroes do the same by pulling up at the watering hole to make allies, meeting enemies, and learn the rules of special worlds. I love this metaphor here, or analogy I guess you could say, that he uses, how a hunter who's hunting his prey will go to a watering hole where he will search for tracks of animals and see how fresh they are, see if this is a place that they come often. He'll hide there, he'll basically be gaining his information there, and that's where he catches his prey. And it's the same in stories. That's why they go to the bar. They go to the bar to make connections, to find information, to find enemies and like other allies and competitors and stuff like that. So it's very interesting looking at bar scenes like that, because there's so many bar scenes in so many stories. Bar scene's a good place to set the scene for the special world. The approach to the Inmost Cave is the approach to the heart of the story. This is the intermediate region between the border and the very center of the hero's journey. The hero has learned what they need to know about the special world. They now make final preparations for the central ordeal. So now we're moving on to the approach to the Inmost Cave. During the approach, stories have scenes where the hero makes plans, scouts out the enemy, reorganizes, arms himself, or has a last laugh, one final cigarette, before entering no man's land. I love that one final cigarette phrase that they used, because it makes me think of, like, in a lot of war movies, that's exactly what they do. Or I actually just watched, what was it? I just watched Reacher, the TV show, and this isn't spoiling anything, but there's this one character, he's like, hey, you got a cigarette? And he's like, yeah, why? And he's like, I just want to know what it, he says something like, I want to know what it feels like to be alive before I die, or something like that. Like some line like that. But basically, it's the same thing here. Like, he's having one last cigarette before he enters into no man's land, where he may lose his life. Heroes must stay alert during this time, as there may still be unforeseen obstacles to come. Often, a threshold guardian will be met before entering the location of the central ordeal. Past experiences may come in handy at this time to help pay their way, or find a route around the threshold guardian. It is important to show the audience that the adventure was in no way a waste. This is so important. I love this quote, because there's been multiple times I've even watched a movie or read a story where I'm like, the whole beginning was worthless. It was meaningless. They didn't connect it well enough. And what happens is a lot of writers forget to connect their introduction and the beginning of their adventure to the end of their adventure, and show that it was worth all of the pain and struggle they went through to get to this point. Like, all of those things that they learned through those obstacles helped them during this time. Like, they need to connect, or it'll feel like a waste. Sometimes Brandon Sanderson talks about this, where in some of his videos, where the payoff in your story is really important. Like, sometimes you're writing a story and your hero gets to the climax, and your reader might say, wow, they went through all that pain for this? Like, this payoff wasn't worth it. Like, they went through so much. Whereas on other times, they will have the complete opposite happen, where they'll get this huge reward at the end, and your reader will be like, they barely did anything. Like, that's all it took to get that, like, it's not a big deal then. It doesn't feel like it was such a good story that you were hoping for. So it's the same thing here. Like, you need to make sure your story's all connected and none of it feels wasteful. You want your reader to think about your story and think, yeah, this character needed to go through these things in order to be ready for these things, or whatever the case may be. At the innermost cave, the hero will usually encounter another, newer special world, sometimes smaller or just within the home base of the special world the hero has already been in. So, like, if you think of, like, maybe they're in the Death Star, and then after being in the Death Star, Luke goes into a room where he and only Darth Vader, and, that's an example of, a newer special world. It's even deeper in the cave. The hero knows they're going to face their biggest challenge here and will often prepare best they can for what is to come. It's good for heroes to go into the main event in a state of balance with confidence tempered by humility and awareness of the danger. And you see this in a lot of stories, like right before someone will face their biggest, greatest obstacle, whether it's a dangerous one or maybe it's a race of some sort, someone will there'll be a heart-touching moment where someone's like, I love you, and then like they'll kiss, and then you'll be like, I'll see you on the other side, and then like the adventure takes place, or like the big climactic moment takes place. That happens in a lot of stories. That is the humbling moment that takes place, that humbles your hero to remind them, like, life is on the line. Some allies may leave the hero's side when the going gets tough, which is unfortunate but true. When heroes are delayed by obstacles, this can be used to become more acquainted with their allies. An emotional appeal, bond of human feeling, is another way heroes can bypass threshold guardians. When the hero enters a foreign territory, they are often met with an impossible task to get what they want. Remember, they're challenging the status quo of the special world. If you think about that, like, what that means, challenging the status quo, that is what a character is doing. That's like one of the things that makes a hero and a story so worth reading and so enjoyable, because it's someone going against the flow. And that's things we all want to do. We all want to break away and go against the flow, go against the current, go against the status. And that's what makes a good story. I love that. Sometimes the very people you will naturally turn to in a crisis will push you away. I love this note because you see this a lot in stories where your character is trying to find help for something, and while they're trying to find help, they can't find it because no one is willing to help them. And sometimes they even go to the desperate depths of going to a parent or going to a fatherly figure or someone close to them, someone they respect well, and they don't help them. So like if you think of like Wizard of Oz, Dorothy goes to Oz and he says, sorry, can't help you unless you do this. Like, or if you think of Shrek, he doesn't respect Lord Farquaad, but he tells him he wants a swamp back and he says, sorry, can't help you unless you do this. If you think of, you probably don't know this story, but I just watched this show on Amazon Prime called Guilty Party. And there's this point where the main character goes to talk to the mother, and the mother says, sorry, not going to help you. So like, those are great examples of sometimes we go to the very people we need the most and they still reject us. And that's just real life, and that just feels so realistic when you add that in a story. So highly recommend you add something like that in your story. The hero approaches closer and closer to life and death as they near the inmost cave, obviously. The hero encounters disheartening setbacks while nearing the inmost cave. These are dramatic complications, a test of their willingness to proceed. This is a shaman's territory, a place where heroes and allies are often pulled apart, but then put back together in a fuller form. So sometimes you gotta fall down before you can get back up. You gotta be pulled apart before you get put back together, like this says, like a shaman, like with witch doctor stuff. Function of the approach to the inmost cave is to up the stakes. So like as you're getting closer to this great ordeal, you want it to get more tense. This rededicates the team to their mission. This can be something like a ticking clock, which indicates the urgency of success. When a hero is facing a dark time, it's good for them to have a reminder or item of importance. In Wizard of Oz, Dorothy has the mentor's gift, the ruby slippers, her last hope when imprisoned by the wicked witch. In many stories, there comes a time to call an ally and or lessons learned to get them out of a pickle. It's a heroic moment when a team regroups, no longer counting on a mentor to bail them out. And this makes me think of like Gandalf. He bails out people during Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit sometimes, but at other times they have to kind of rely on themselves, and he's nowhere to be seen to help them. But sometimes they have to work as a team to get out of a trap. Sometimes the main character will pass the hero mask over to the allies who stop to save them. Sometimes this is done so poorly in stories because allies are kind of just like, I talked about this in my last episode about this, but sometimes allies are basically just comedic relief in a story, and they kind of just aren't very useful to the plot of the story, and then out of nowhere it's like, oh no, the hero's in danger, step up to the plate, and then they do and they save him, and it's like, this guy was worthless all along and now he's being useful, and then he's going to go back to being worthless and the hero's going to win in the end anyway. So there's better ways to do this, which like this should be how it's done. It should be where they work as a team to get out of a trap, and your ally should not just be one-dimensional and then all of a sudden become the hero. You know, when they become the hero, it should look like they deserve to become the hero, and this is their time to shine, and they have lived up to this moment. They have lived up to this standard. They have taken these obstacles and challenges just like the hero has. So it's really important that your allies are useful in a story, so that once you have a moment where they maybe save the hero, it doesn't just feel like, oh really, like now they're useful. This kind of goes back to like my point when I was talking about like, don't have your story feel wasteful. Remember, the mentors can't hold the hero's hand forever. There must be a time where the hero and or allies are on their own. Think of like, you know, any Jedi master that dies, you know, or Obi-Wan, for example. He dies at one point, or like he moves on from helping Luke, and he's just kind of his spirit talking to him. And that's an example of, you know, Luke, you can like, there will be a time where I cannot help you anymore. The approach to the Inmost cave is complete when the hero is ready to face the life and death issue head on. Sometimes this happens when a hero barges into the enemy's headquarters and is surrounded with no escape. This makes me think of Shrek, when Shrek barges in, tells Fiona he loves her, and then Lord Farquaad has all the guards surround him. It also makes me think of like a lot of action movies that are kind of like cheesy. The hero will be just like mowing through everyone with their bullets and destroying everyone, and then there comes this one point where they're surrounded, and it's like, oh no, now it's serious, and then somehow they come out alive anyway. But yeah, so that is my last note that I wrote in the month of February. I do have some notes already written for March, as I'm recording this a little late, but that's all I got for February. I'm actually really excited to get into March, because March is where I start talking about the ordeal, and the ordeal is just super interesting to talk about. I mean, these were interesting to talk about too, but hopefully you learned something. Hopefully this is making sense. Like I said, I would highly recommend you buy The Writer's Journey. It has been so life-changing to me as a writer, and has made a world of a difference in my writing style, and just being able to write for others. You know, I'm a ghostwriter, and that's part of my full-time job. So as a ghostwriter, I need to know how to come up with stories quickly and well. So, you know, this has really helped me a lot. And yeah, so again, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you liked any specific points, I'd love if you left a comment below and let me know. Or if you thought of any examples of movies or stories that follow some of these points, I'd love to hear those as well. And like the video if you want to support me and show that you appreciate this video. Or if you subscribe to the channel. Yeah, thanks again. And yeah, hopefully I'll see you in the next one.